thank you for joining. I'm super happy to have this occasion to give this talk to different people online. Thanks to Ivana, who approached me at Portal and says that there were people who are not at Portal, who missed it at Portal, who would love to have the talk and have the discussion that comes with it. So thank you, Ivana, for organizing this. I will say who I am first, and I'll try. I don't know how to change my slides. This is horrible. Okay. Um, so who am I? I am Rachel Hoekendijk. I am a LARPer from Belgium. I LARP since 2010. I have a background in philosophy and social science, and I love to analyze LARP also through these lenses. And for this occasion, I did some kind of like sociological approach for this talk without pushing it too far, but still used some qualitative research and interviews for this content. I have LARPed in several groups, but like notably since 2017, I'm part of a group of like more or less 30 people. And that group does like one big event every year and several smaller events that we organize for ourselves. And I think that group specifically has been one of the main reasons that I'm giving this talk, because I've been like living a lot of things with the group and thinking about what was happening and talking with different people about groups. It's also worthwhile noting that the first version of this conference, of this talk, I produced it with Arnaud, who is my partner and who has also a big experience in self-governed groups. So he lives in a house that is shared with something like 10 people, and they share more or less everything like meals, organization, work on the house. They talk of very complex topics like money and responsibility, and they address things when it's like not going well. So they have this big experience of self-organizing and yeah, like having to take decisions together, etc. And for this talk, we really wanted to merge these two experiences of LARP and also self-governed groups, because there's a lot of theory there that we can use as LARPers, and everyone doesn't know about that. So I'm going to draw from different fields, be it like self-governance, collective intelligence, sociology, psychology, sociological psychology. But I'll try to just really give tools that are very concrete. The reason why this talk exists also is that a few years ago in 2022, I had a discussion at one of our Belgian LARP conferences with someone who was a less experienced LARPer, more of a newcomer to the community. And he was explaining that he created a group for this year's event. And they really organized, they did a lot of things. And he was saying, I don't think we will survive this first year because it was too much of a hard work. There was a lot of drama, of conflict, different things happening in the group. And we were talking a little bit about that with him and another experienced LARPer, I would say. And we kind of laughed a bit about how we really should have a talk that would be called, What Would I Have Liked to Know Before Creating My Group in LARP? So this is how it started. It turned out it's becoming a little bit more than that, because I did a lot of interviews with different groups. So I'll go say more about that after. It's really annoying not to see my own mouse. Okay, so why did I go and interview different LARPers, different groups? Is that I think we need a culture of precedence. I don't think we say it like that, but precedence. That's it. One thing, like one reason for that is we need it for the knowledge that comes with it, that composes it. Like people have knowledge about stuff that this new LARPer didn't have. Oh, can you read it if my face is here? I guess not. I'll try to move a bit out of the way. So we need it for the knowledge that composes it. We need it for the breathing it offers. Sometimes we feel alone in the conflicts or the difficulties that we have in our LARPs groups, and it helps to know that like a lot of people have known these problems before. So it helps us to feel preceded, less alone. And also it helps us to push the path of experimentation. There are like a lot of different ways to organize as a group. And sometimes we only know one way and we reproduce that with every group that we participate in. And just knowing of other ways of being in a group, it helps a lot. So that is what we call an ecology of practices. So that's what we'll try to talk about in the group, in the talk here. I have one quote from a book that's about small groups, and I'll just read it and comment after. Feeling tired or peachy, the atmosphere being heavily loaded or lighthearted, these are not general issues. They are micro changes happening singularly, acting as the signs of transformations running through the group. This is where vigilance comes in around these signs. So sometimes we have a very, like we feel like powerless about what's happening in a group. We're like, hey, this is going well. And all of a sudden there's all of this drama and we did not see it coming. And I think I think, and a lot of other people think, that there are specific skills that we can develop in a group that help us navigate group's energy or whatever happens in a group. And it's very interesting or worthwhile to notice that we have a hard time addressing these things in terms that are not specifically like psychology. Like most of the time, the tools we have to think about this are not very appropriate to feel like we have leverage on what's happening in the group. So I'm first going to go through like a typology of LARP groups. What am I talking about when I talk about LARP groups? First thing is when I talk about LARP groups, I talk about the way LARPers organize as groups to participate in LARPs. So it's not the factions in game, although these are groups too, but it's the out of game organizations that people are participating in. And I see, or we with Arnaud made like 3 typologies of these. What we called a nucleus is a group of like 4 to 6 people. Usually they are like more, sometimes they are organized by the organization of the LARP, like they are put together, like, oh, the people who have this kind of game. And usually they don't organize that much outside of the game. So they are a particular thing. A second type of group is what we call a group. We call a group is something between 15 and 40 people, and I'll be more about that later. And then there's a third thing that we call factions. Factions are usually more than 40 people and composed of several subgroups. Is when you pass a certain threshold in terms of number, the group kind of decomposes in several subgroups that organize in smaller pieces. So here we will specifically be talking about groups that try to have some kind of unity in their organization. And more criteria is we will be addressing groups that intend to last several years. And usually that involves having joint costs, like out-of-game management of resources, energy, crafting things together, putting money into costumes, etc., because that draws a whole set of interesting things happening in groups that come from that. So I have conducted with Arnaud, we have conducted several interviews. The idea behind that is that we wanted to go and talk to people who participate in groups that we see as fairly successful. Like they have managed to survive several years. They seem to have an interesting dynamic. So we wanted to talk to these people and ask them about their groups in order to know what are the good practices, like what can we learn from this. So just to give an idea, here are a few questions that we asked, like how is the group created? What type of people are part of it? How is it structured? How are the resources managed, like money, the costumes, the decoration, etc. Were there like trials or decisive moments in the group's life? Are there sources of tension? How are decisions made? What kind of like power and leadership? How is it distributed? Um, how are new people integrated in a group? Like all these questions are very concrete, out of the game questions. I do want to talk more about in-game organization in the future projects, but now it's really the out of game. How do we survive as a group of friends? Um, so yes, I asked you before we started actually, like what are some popular beliefs that we have about groups and how they function? You have given a few, like it's hard work, it's necessary, it isn't always functional. Uh, when the group grows, sometimes it loses its reason why they exist and it like becomes complicated. Here I have listed some more that I have heard. So again, mostly in the Belgian community, because this is the field in which I conducted this study, and I'm very interested in knowing how in the FOG community or the Balkan community, are these the same? Are these not the same? It can be very different. But so here I'm sharing a little bit about what I heard in Belgium. Um, so the first one is uh, we had a great project and then it all fell apart because of one person's ego. What a shame. Something that I've heard several times. And I can mostly imagine most of the time that it might be more complicated than just one person's ego, but sometimes that's how it's felt when we are inside the situation. At the beginning, everyone was very involved in the Discord or Facebook group or whatever. Now it's always the two same people who like the posts. So there's this like phantomatic ghosting into the groups. Um, Everyone wants to give their opinion on everything, but it's just not sustainable. That's one thing that also happens a lot. Like we want people to be involved, we want people to be able to participate, but that again asks for organization, and sometimes that's one of the things that's difficult. When it is volunteer-based, it can never be qualitative. That's something that people maybe draw from their professional experience. Like if you want to have something qualitative, you need to have people like on a work agenda. And if people do it just because they want it on their spare time, we cannot obtain some qualitative results. Most groups revolve around a core of 2 or 3 charismatic leaders. So that's, I think, the one that we hear the most in Belgium is this idea of a group is 2, 3 people who are really at its core, and then around them they drag people in. So the idea of groups being like 2 separate levels of involvement. And the last one I really, really deeply appreciate because I think I identify, but it's not me. Um, you have got to let go of the idea that everyone needs to contribute equally and recognize that everyone contributes as they can. But when you end up emptying the truck and putting everything to dry with just 2 other people at 3 a.m. after the big event, that's hard. But at the same time, I recognize I put as much energy as I want into the game. I think this one is very interesting because there are several buts, and the person is really trying to balance out their expectations, their like sadness or deception of having like being disappointed in other people in the group for not contributing in the same level. So that's like one thing that's often often felt in people who are involved in groups. So how I wanted to navigate or like to start the presentation is by explaining or presenting some of the groups that we interviewed. Not all of them, because there are like many, but we made a selection of several ones, specifically for Portal, actually, because it's interesting to hear about groups from other countries or other LARP scenes that you may not know, and just to compare with your own scene. And also, I think these groups are they all have some interesting way of organizing. I think they show the diversity of groups very well. Um, Boyko Boychev, you have your mic on, like if you can mute it because we can hear you. Okay, so the first group I'm going to talk about, there will be 6, just so you know, is the Company of Flesh and Blood, who used to be in the previous run of the same game, the Kobolds. So the Company of Flesh and Blood is group that is formed of people that kind of started LARP, I think in 2002, 2003. And most of them were like, when they were 17, they were in different groups. And they dragged the groups they were very involved. So 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, like forever ago, they were youth that were very involved, they were very motivated, and they were in groups that were typically organized around 2 or 3 people giving all of the energy, and the other being what they call tourists. So they were very ambitious in the game they wanted to build in the game, in the LARP. But they thought that they needed to be many in order to win battles. So they recruited a lot of people in order to be a big army and win fights. But then they were frustrated because everyone was not contributing the same amount of energy. What happened is that these 2 or 3 people from several groups, they ended up rallying together and forming a group together of people who are highly involved. They also kind of united the material things they had, like tents and all kinds of stuff that they had, in order to form one group. So now they're a group of older LARPers who LARP for a very long time, who have a lot of stuff and weapons and etc., and a lot of experience in organizing, and they are very clear in how to what to expect from one another, because they all know what it's like to be involved in a group and try to build that. So they're highly functional from their own terms. They say there's not a lot of drama. They say it's actually very easy to organize. But they do admit that they have not a lot of new people coming. They only have new recruits that are already friends, that they already know, that are already experienced in LARP. So that makes it easier to work. They share a very strong common experience of how they organize. The fourth rum is, I think, the opposite of the first group in terms of category. The fourth rum is a group that was created by younger LARPers who discovered LARP in teenage summer camps, LARP summer camps. So they started LARPing when they were teenagers, and when they were 18, they started to attend like the adult LARPs, the grown-up LARPs, and they were kind of disappointed by the fact that a lot of people didn't involve a lot, like didn't play a lot with them because they were young. Their costumes were maybe not as pretty as other people's, and they felt kind of frustrated by that. So they organized a group of young LARPers in order to give a place in the game for other people their age. And they organized a team of pirates with different crews. At the start, there were 4 pirate ships that were kind of in competition with one another. And they tried to give as many roles, important responsibility roles, to as many people in the group, because they wanted everyone to feel like they had game, they could have responsibilities, etc. Outside of the game, they were very radical in the way they wanted to organize horizontally. The talk is going to be around 2 hours. I'm responding to the chat here. Um, so they were very radical in organizing horizontally. They had a Facebook group where everyone had like could give their opinion on any decision. They had like monthly workshops or fighting training sessions in order to meet. They had a lot of meetings, a lot of discussions, and they all say it was like really difficult to uphold the energy, and people were dropping out, and they were like, it's hard to hear everyone's opinion, and everything was taking too much time. So they tried to organize a little bit, and I think if I should put a single word on how they organized on their process, is die and retry. The way of like some role-playing games are like that. They tried something, they saw the difficulty of the method, they paid the costs of like human interaction, like relationships and energy and the drama, and then they tried something else, and then they learned through that process. I think it's a group that did all of the things that may not work, but they learned a lot from the process. So that's interesting. Maybe I'll try to go a little bit quicker. I know there's a lot of things to say about this group, but I need to remember to keep the pace. La Cure, or The Cure in English, is a group of uh, doctors in the LARP. So the first year they created a hospital, and everyone was kind of a healer. And the group was created by 2 or 3 people who had the initial idea, and they recruited a lot of people. What happened is that after 1 or 2 years, the rest of the group were not very happy about the 2 or 3 founders, the way they organized things. They thought they were like giving too much instructions. They were too tyrannical in a way in their way of organizing. So the group said, we were not going to obey your demands anymore, but we're not going to leave the group. That's more or less how it was explained to me, and I imagine there's a lot of complexity to that story, but that's the narrative. Um, so there was a weird moment of reorganization, and then the 2 or 3 founders of the groups, they left, and the rest of the group, they decided that they will come back to the LARP next year, and they did not organize anything. They just said, we will be there. They had a Facebook group, and sometimes the organization of the LARP asked things of them, like, we need to have a camp implementation, we need to know how many people you are. And they kind of organized on the group, like, hey, has someone time to respond to that email? And someone did. And then the next year, they just showed up, and it worked. So it's a group that did not organize. I mean, they, in a very minimal way. Um, one of the years, they ended up arriving at the LARP and realizing they did not have an hospital, because they did not think of like the tent, or like they did not have the hospital. And I thought, oh, that's a shame, but it's not going to keep us from having a good weekend. So next year, maybe we'll think about it. With the years, more and more people were playing characters that were not healers anymore. And at some point, they were like, hey, it's a bit weird. We're supposed to be a caravan of healers, and now we're not that many healers. And I thought, okay, well, I guess if someone dies and they create a new character, they may just create a healer. So they just let go of a lot of things and created a culture of we're here to have fun, and if there's a problem, we will just address it, or we will just build new things with it, but nothing is really a problem. If no one wants to do it, then we'll not do it. Now the group is working very well. They have started organizing more, like thinking, oh, if there's new people, maybe we should explain how our group works. So they're trying to make new like rules or explain how their group works. How they do it is like on their Discord, someone does a post, makes a post, like, I think this should be a rule, and if it has a certain amount of likes, this becomes a rule. If someone gives an idea that people don't like, most of the time they're like, well, I can live with it. Or if it doesn't work, I guess people will realize after. So it's a group that has a very minimum organization, and it seems like it's working. The Sea Weasel crew is, I think, the opposite of the previous group. It's a group that attends Mythodia in the Conquest in Germany. And it started with like 2 or 3 people saying, we want to go to Mythodia. And then they thought, maybe other people want to join. And they organize everything. So they, in their own terms, are the 2 or 3 people who started it, an enlightened dictatorship. So they decide everything on the group. They organize tents. They organize the transportation to Mythodia, and they conduct interviews with people who need to be agreeing with how the group functions, and share a set of values. These are the rules, and these are not going to be discussed. And they only accept people who are there with their vision of the game. They have like a songbook also. Like they sing a lot, and the songs that get to be on the songbook are decided by the 3 people who organize the group. Like there's no discussion. This is not a democracy. That's what I said. This is us organizing things. If you're not happy, you don't come. And most people are actually very happy about it. It's a group that's thriving because most of the players there are also attending other groups, and they are giving a lot of energy in other groups. And so it's easy to not expect too much from people for every LARP. So people are very happy to follow. One interesting thing is their recruitment method is what they call cotton candy method. Cotton candy is like when you're spinning the thing, like you can, if you know someone in the group, or if you know someone who would want to attend Conquest of Mythodia, well, we can join the name, but total newcomers are not going to just arrive. If you're a friend of a friend, you're probably going to be a friend. So you're probably going to share certain types of values or way of vibing. But even with that, throughout the years, they realized that some people did not know each other that well. So they did like an Excel with questions that would be like, how are you when you're tired? If we see you alone in a corner, how should we interact with you? Are you an introvert or an extrovert? What do you need specifically in a camp? So that everyone can answer these questions, and you get a lot of information about people you don't know in order to be able to have a fluid and very nice game when you're on site. So they organized a lot. They thought a lot of like, what will we need and what can we put in place? I think that's something that's not done in most groups. Quickly on the 2 last groups, this is La Stygia in a Conan the Barbarian world in France. It's a faction or a group here. It's a larger group that it's a bit complicated, but it's a group of in the Conan the Barbarian world. The Stygia is people that are slavers, very like dark arts and like orgies and all these kind of things. And this is happening in a LARP that's a mass LARP, where that is not the norm. The organizers said that they wanted to have one group representing these people in the game. And the first people who played the Stygia kind of died out. I think there was conflict or something. So there was a new version of the Stygia with like just one remaining from the first Stygia group. And it was joined by a lot of people who usually, or some people who usually don't play mass LARPs that much. They come more from I don't know, Nordic LARP scene, or like different LARP scenes that are just fighting LARPs. And for some reason, they just really succeeded into merging those 2 LARP cultures together in order to bring a lot of meta techniques and LARP cultures from other LARP spheres into that mass LARP. And also finding a way of creating a group, a culture with not older LARPers, but LARPers that have been playing that mass LARP before and did not have that LARP culture, and people who usually don't play mass LARP and have these meta techniques and workshops and etc. That asks for a lot of pedagogy and a lot of listening to people and what their needs are, etc. And it really worked out, even to influencing the mass LARPs culture more of a whole. The last group is the Kaiduken. It's a group that I'm part of. And the one reason I selected this group is that the Kaiduken were a group that were kind of like successful in the mass LARP that we played. A lot of people were looking up to them. Like they were cool. They were so coherent. Their costumes were so pretty. They succeeded a lot of things. They were kind of like stars. And one thing that was difficult for that group to navigate is their reputation and the expectations it set. And I think that's something that we hear in a lot of groups. I've heard that also from the FOG participants talking about several groups. Like at some point, the ego becomes too big and it needs to be managed. What happened for us is that our reputation was also always setting the bar, and we were kind of forcing ourselves into being like leveling with that reputation, and we were exhausted. And throughout the years, the group like kind of pushed the reputation or the expectations more and more, to a certain point where last year people said like, I love you guys, but I cannot continue this anymore. Like this is becoming too intense. This is becoming too much involved. And it kind of exploded around like a lot of things happening. But I think that was a part of it, like the difficulty of taking the ego down, or accepting to be maybe not as extraordinary or not as brilliant, not as, I don't know, than you wish you would in your head. Like your idea of your group is this, so you're putting yourself a lot of pressure, which is something that yeah, we see a lot. And there has been a discussion in the group, like people said, actually, I want to continue, but it's not sustainable. And we needed to have these discussions in order to accept that we were probably going to be a disappointment next year, because we did not want to be as competitive or as intensive as we were the years before, because it was not sustainable. So we're trying to navigate that. And I think a lot of groups also are trying to navigate the same type of things. So here are some of the LARP groups that I interviewed. The rest of the talk is going to be cut into themes that are very common when we talk about groups. The first one is power, authority, and leadership. The second one is formalizing and structuring. The third one is conflict, which includes trauma, crisis of all kinds. And the third one is the group's cycle of life. If you have questions, don't hesitate to put them in the chat, and I will try to read them and or answer to them as we are going. Or we can have a discussion at the end also. So in terms of definition, LARP groups most of the time are collaborative groups. I'm going to try to disappear from the title. So collaborative groups. I wanted to ask the question. I'm not sure we're going to have this discussion now, but if you have examples, please put them in this chat. But how are power, authority, and leaderships handled in your groups? Out of game, I mean. I think this is one of the very important questions. I also want to comment on the picture, which I like. The PowerPoint is mostly made when the picture of one of the mass LARPs in Belgium was the pictures were released. And I like how in the left corner there, oh, you cannot see him because I'm there. Wait, I'm going to just try to disappear. In the left corner of this picture, there's this guy who's just drinking. No, he can follow me. And I like how in a lot of LARP dramatic scenes, like there's a lot of things going on. There's always this like one person who's just drinking in a corner, vibing, having a great time, and not being bothered by the intensity of what's happening. So high five to that person. So how are leadership, power, and authority distributed? I have this quote from Starhawk, who is an activist who wrote a lot about collaborative groups. She says, groups need fire. They need the driving energy of passion to move forward. But the structure of the group must contain and direct that fire, otherwise it will burn out of control. When power and authority, which is the permission to use power, are balanced with responsibility, the group is in a position to act. But to find this balance, we need to understand what power is. I think this quote is very important because we as LARP groups want to achieve things. That's one of the things that we do is we're not just a group of friends. We also want to have some performance in it. We want to be cool. I don't know. We want to organize. We want to build a LARP that is at the level of our expectations, and that requires that we act. We do things. And the question is, who gets to act? Who gets to decide? Who gets to put this like a drive, the engine in motion? And that requires power. One thing I forgot to say is about collaborative group is that the definition of collaborative group, if I want to apply that to LARP, is a group of friends that usually have the ambition of remaining friends, which is not always easy, but that's the ambition, and to collaborate in order to achieve things. Usually, the fact that we're a group of friends makes us want to avoid hierarchy, like power dynamics, like pyramids, with people dominating other people, because in groups of friends, usually we don't want that. So in collaborative groups, we want to achieve things, we want to be ambitious, to move this group forward, but we want to avoid power dynamics that are like suppressing people. So Starhawk says, in order to do that, we need to understand what power is. My face is a bit in the way, so I will disappear, I think, I cannot disappear, so I will not, oh, I can. Okay, I will disappear for this slide so we can read more easily. Definitions of power. There are different definitions of power that says Starhawk. The first one is power over. It's coercive power, a coercive power. It is a form of power that we're very familiar with because that's what we learn in our schools, in our families, most of the times, in our workplaces. And this is a type of power that is founded on controlling resources, imposing sanctions, punishments, hiring or firing, including or excluding. Everyone knows what that kind of power is. Like we all have an experience of that. The point is that this is not the only form of power. So Starhawk invites us to explore different forms of power. The second form of power is the power from within. It is a creative power, almost a spiritual power at some point. When you read Starhawk, there is this like nuance at some point. It could be spiritual, but it's creative. It's the power that we give ourselves. It's the power that you feel when you speak out a powerful truth, for example, or when we sing. And I think for groups that sing together in LARPs or that have this kind of practices, we can feel how we feel powerful at some point when we do these things. When we sing together, when we create a work of art. This power from within can be embodied in courage or like moments of deep connections that we can strive for in groups. The third type of power is collective power. Collective power is a power that a group has when we act together as one, like we put our individual interests on the aside in order to have this collective energy. This collective power can be called solidarity in the history of how do you call syndicates? Like workers on their work place that unite, unions we call them. So unions incarnate this type of power very well because it's people getting together in order to advance the collective interest. The third, for some reason, I cannot go to next slide. Okay. The fourth type of power is the power with, and I think that's the most important one. It is social power. It is the power that's given by influence, rank, symbolic power, authority. Um, it's the type of power that like determines how much you are listened to in a group, like how much weight your opinions carry and how much respect you command. Like some people in a group, for some reason, when they come up with an idea, people just agree. They trust it. They think it's legitimate. Some people, when they are not there, for some reason, the meeting seems less important. So that's kind of power with social power, and it's a power that's mostly hard to grasp because people tend um, to confuse it with power over. And because co-creative groups tend to want to eliminate power over and hierarchy, they tend to disregard and fail to recognize what comes with social power. Um, Social power can be distributed with two criteria. The first one is merit, like people who have contributed a lot to the group, people who have been generous to the group, who have been structured the group, they have given a lot to the group. They have merit, and it would be suiting that they get power within because they have showed the group that they will use it in the benefit of the group. So that's one thing to distribute the power with, the social power. But the other way of distributing it is privilege. And that is when it's distributed not based on the actions of someone, but of what someone is. Like, for example, someone is older and they get more social power because they have like authority more. Or people are males and they get more time, like people listen to them more because of privilege. Um, so this is one interesting thing to keep in place because sometimes we disregard people who contribute to the groups because we are not paying attention to the like invisible work or these kind of things. But social power should be distributed or with regard to merit. Power with, so this fourth type of power, it gives legitimacy to the group, in the group. And in collaborative group, we mostly want people to feel legitimate, to participate and contribute. If people don't feel legitimate, they will not contribute. And we will have the feeling that there are a lot of tourists that do nothing. But this is typically a situation where power distribution, power with distribution comes in the screen. If there are questions about this type of power or anything that I'm saying, you can put them in the chat. I can try to clarify if it's needed. So like sometimes it's hard to think about what a leader is because what we have in our heads of what a leader is a chief or like someone who decides. Because in our workplaces, most of the time, we have the experience of like having a boss that bosses us around or has the power of like taking decisions, and that's what a like leader is like linked to in our heads. But there are like a lot of other things to see about leadership that are like can contribute a lot to groups because sometimes groups lack leadership. Like there's a lot of people who are very talented, very like motivated in a group, but for some reason nothing is happening. Or I don't know, some people give energy on one idea and then other people give energy on another idea. And for some reason, it just doesn't sum up to some greater achievement. People just feel like they are walking on each other's toes. So we are in need of leadership in groups in order to organize and direct the fire again. So what can a leader do if it's not bossing people around? Electra Diacolambrianou, I hope I'm not butchering her name, and Sarah Lynn Bowman have this talk about groups. in LARP, and they have identified a few principles of group leadership. And I realize I have 2 slides that say the same thing, and I'm going to like go to the next one because it's, I think, more synthetic. So functions of group facilitators or like leadership. The first is stimulation, like proposing ideas, getting the group moving. The second one is care, like offering support, security, authenticity, attention. I think a lot of groups, they explode because there's a lot of anxiety in the group that is not attended or not directed or not addressed. And typically, a facilitator or a leader can have that role of addressing tensions. The third one is attributing meaning, like encouraging explanations, clarifications, providing a cognitive framework in order for people to have the same narration like in their heads and being together and going to a similar direction. And the last one is executive function, is like setting frameworks, rules, objectives that are the right pace and the right ambitions, the right level of ambitions. Like managing expectations is typically one of them. And I think if I go back to my LARP group that I participated in, the Kaiduken, we at some point lacked the ability to set the pace for ourselves in order to be sustainable. So sometimes there are people in the groups that are very like enthusiastic and they wonder for like a lot of ideas, and they come to the Discord and they like arrive like, I don't know, 5 ideas. We should do this and this and this and organize an event and etc. etc. And these people are at the same time like they should be valued because they give a lot of energy to the group, but it can be very destructuring for the group's dynamic and pace because it can burn out other people. It can really hurt the group as a whole. So facilitators or leaders really can try to tend to that togetherness of the group moving together and not burning out or not being realistic about what the group can offer. Yeah, and in terms of power, I'm gonna repeat myself, but setting the pace for the group is something that leaders can do. And in terms of it can be very destructive to go in like very different paces. I don't know. I'm gonna stop on that topic. I'm going to jump in on the second topic, that is structure, with this beautiful picture of a tent with people underneath. Maybe you can imagine what I'm going to talk about with the tent being the structure and the group being not only the tent. So one thing of seeing a group is seeing it as a framework, a structure, and an internal movement, whatever that is. And I think it's very helpful to see the group with these 2 tools because sometimes there are structures that exist, for example, associations that have been existing for 25 years, and there's nothing happening in them. Like they're not alive. They're just a structure. And there's a lot of groups that exist in an informal manner, but they're not structured. They're not put into a framework that is explicit. That makes it hard to recognize them. So we can see a group as a structure that is, for example, the state of intent of the group. Like we intend to participate in that LARP in order to play mercenaries, for example. The rules charter that the group gives itself. Sometimes a legal status, like some groups are organized as an association, a legal association. Some are not. The internal organization, like this is the person who does the accountability and the treasury of the group. This is the person who does this. So this is all like roles and political roles that are explicit, that are usually created after the group exists. And this is important to remember because sometimes we think a group is its external structure. But we also should learn to be vigilant or attentive to the internal movement of the group. Because before anything else, that is what exists. It's some kind of, I don't know how to say it other than just some kind of energy that people have together. So forces that propagate and radiate, and meeting with other forces create something together. And this is what makes us feel like we are part of a group. This is what makes us feel that the group still exists. Sometimes there are LARP groups that used to be one group, and now it's some kind of faction with different subgroups, but it's not a group anymore. And the energies don't create that togetherness anymore. So that's interesting to see, because it helps us give a diagnosis and like, where are we now? So you must remember that the structure of the group is always kind of one step later than the internal force. With the same, I know I cannot move around. Sorry, I will just stay here and put myself aside or become smaller. So the same thing applies to rules in group. Some rules are formal, like explicit, formalized. Some rules are not. There's not a list of rules that apply to every group, because every group tends to organize with its own people. But it can be a very interesting exercise to like look at the group that you participate in and try to identify the roles that people have. Because sometimes roles are our best superpower and is what makes us the most annoying. For example, like I said earlier, that person that comes up with a lot of ideas, sometimes it's a blessing to have someone like that in the group, because they give a lot of energy and ideas. But sometimes we get very annoyed by that person, because that person comes with a lot of ideas and energy at the wrong moment, and we have to address other things. Maybe someone in the group is going to be the person that always sees the problem, like, this is not working, this is not enough, this is not blah, blah, blah. Again, that can be like very good, and it can be very annoying. Roles can be explicit, like they can be made into the structure of the group, and that helps to make people feel seen and to help us navigate the moments when we can feel someone is annoying because of their role. Like saying, I love how you're someone that gives a lot of energy, but this is not a moment, for example. And that gives us tools to give it without canceling the person, like it's not a person, it's the role they have in the group. So here there's some list of rules, but there can be many others. And I think it's a very interesting exercise to do with your own group, is to name those rules. There are also several tools that give already a list of rules that can be used, but I think it's really interesting to just do the exercise for one own. So that's it for the structure and the internal movement of the group. I hope everyone is still going well. Please tell me in the discussion, if like in the chat, if you need anything. Otherwise, I'll just continue because there's a lot of content. So conflict, I think, is the most interesting topic, because that's where groups explode. And so that's where people are hurt, and that's where people tend to never engage with group again, because they are hurt by the conflict. And navigating conflict can be difficult. Now, conflict is also very cultural. So each culture has a way of being conflictual or of being not conflictual. Like navigating conflict is cultural. So I'm going to talk about what I know of conflict, and well, like we can always discuss it later, what specificities we see in our own LARP culture. This talk was thought of as being interactive, which I think is not working so well with Zoom. But what kind of conflicts have emerged in your LARP groups, and how was it solved? You can think about it in your head, or maybe put it in a chat. I don't think we have time to listen to several examples, but Yeah, we usually have an experience of conflict. Um, that can be a hurtful experience. Starhawk again. So she says there's a major problem with collaborative groups is that they're made up of people, and it's bloody hard to get along with people. To a certain extent, the existence of group is a miracle, like that people can join together and be collaborative and achieve things together, considering how hard it is to get along and to organize it. Like we should value it. It's precious. Um, Again, Electra and Sarah Bowman have listed in their talk conflict and role playing in LARP communities, like often topics or things that are recurring themes in the conflicts that emerge, schisms between people, internet communication. Like I have like one group I interviewed, they had a lot of things to say about how people would write a very long posts and comments where they insult each other at like 3 a.m. and things getting completely out of hand. And I think that is not an isolated experience, and some people have had experiences with that. Um, Intimate relationships. And I have a very fun quote again from Starhawk um, that says, "Sex. In Dreaming the Dark, which is a book that she wrote previously, um, I proposed three rather cynical laws about small groups. And that's what Starhawk explains. The first one is in any small group, there will, ooh, sorry, in any small group where there is sex, sooner or later, there will be serious conflict. Second one, in any small group where people are involved, sooner or later, there will be sexual relationships, be it symbolic or imaginary, and I'll let you imagine what that means. Third is small group tend to break up. So these are her cynical laws, and I think for people who have experience with that, it can, like, it is relatable. Um, there can be differences in creative agendas, like types of expectations in terms of role play. There can be conflict of power between players and organizers, and bleed in, bleed out. Like, you can imagine what the recurring themes of conflict can be. Now, in the same video, they suggest different ways of navigating the conflict or dealing with it. I'm going to go quickly, just let you read that. So one thing that's interesting from sociology is the place that conflict has in groups. There are different schools in sociology. Some sociology school, like the functionalists, if some people care about that, they believe that conflicts emerge in group as a way of like stopping the normal healthy process of what's happening in the group, and we need to address the conflict in order to resolve it and go back to a normal functioning. So here conflict is seen as something that's like accidental, that emerges in the group and kind of makes it dysfunctional. In other schools of sociology, conflict is seen as a normal process, natural process of groups. And in that way, conflict is seen as the only thing that makes group evolve and change. So there is a state of normal functioning of the group, and then there is conflict about something, and it changes to something else, and that is healthy. So like a clinical sociology, which is a French school of sociology, it's even seen as a way of showing maturity. Like groups that have been through several conflicts tend to be more mature about conflict because they can handle it well, and it has made the groups evolve. Here I go back to one thing that is often quoted in group content about groups. It's Bruce Tuckman's cycle of stages in group development. Bruce Tuckman is a psychologist, like a psychology researcher. Um, and he says there are four stages of groups development. The first is forming, is the moment where we orient ourselves, we discuss what we want to do together, etc. Then there's a stage of storming, that is the moment when we put these ideas into real life and we try it out. We play with the things that we said. Okay, we said we are going to work like this. Well, how does that work out? And we try to make it real, and that creates a phase where there's a lot of confrontation um and like ambiguity. We try to see how we navigate it. But through that phase of storming, that's a phase that's more conflictual. There's a phase of norming where things kind of settle down and there's some kind of coherence that arrive, and the norms become more clear. People find their roles, etc. And then there's a stage of performing when the group kind of works and people grow, and it's kind of more fluid. One thing that's interesting is that these stages are not specifically linear, like they kind of cycle. And sometimes we can go through like one phase about something and go back to another phase for something else. It just, yeah, it's how the group lives. So one thing that's interesting to see is that conflict can be seen as a natural stage of development in a group. Now, when we navigate conflict, the way we navigate conflict is something that will tell a lot about how the group works. And what I have observed or discussed a lot with different people here in the Belgium Francophone LARP scene is that the last several years, we have tended to navigate conflict in a very rational way. Like if people are in conflict, we kind of try to say, okay, what is the conflict? We try to settle it, and then we have a decision about it, and then it's not a conflict anymore. But that is often not the, the like the whole of the conflict. It doesn't address the whole of it, because conflict is also like a lot of emotions, a lot of things that are maybe not that rational but need to be seen, or different things. And so sometimes navigating conflict in a very rational way is not the most sustainable way of navigating it long term. It's a very good thing to organize conflict, but yeah, it's just something to keep in mind. And what we have observed in the interviews that we have conducted is that several groups that we perceive as being very well functioning, like successful in their functioning, they tend to have a fairly high level of conflictuality in their group. And what we can see is that when there's a high level of conflict, that also means that there's some level of confidence that the group can handle it. Like the container is strong enough for people to feel like their emotions or their dissatisfactions or whatever happens in their relationships and their relationship between people, the group can handle it. And sometimes people are not confident about that, so they will not address or tell the things that they're dissatisfied about, because they feel that the first thing that's going to be negative is going to break up the group. But that ends up in creating conflict or like dissatisfactions that grow and grow and grow. And when they are addressed in the form of crisis and drama. There's one example of a group that I interviewed where they said, like, one of the person that is identified as a leader in the group, he tends to be very frontal with conflict. Like in the middle of a meeting, he would be like, you're not saying something, and that pisses me off. So I'm going to smoke. And when I come back in 10 minutes, you have figured it out. So that's one way of navigating it. And it can seem harsh. At the same time, inside the group, he was recognized as someone who was very healthy in terms of leadership in the group, because he didn't let the small things grow, and he confronted them or created a space where they needed to be confronted. Another example of a group is that of older people, like not older people, like they have been friends for like a lot of time, and they have organized LARP together for like more than 25 years. And when they invited me in their group because I was going to observe their functioning, they said like it happens that sometimes when we are in a meeting or when we are organizing something, we yell and we cry and we like slam the door and we don't talk for several days. That is normal in our group. If you cannot, if you don't feel comfortable with it, like feel free not to come, but this is how we work. And I think it was very interesting how they were explicit about it, and they knew that's how they functioned, and they did have some kind of experience to say this works, which doesn't mean it works all the time, but it's interesting to see how some groups that seem very grounded, they have a high level of conflictuality, and it's not hurting the group as a structure or as a whole. But I think what that requires is some kind of ethics of conflict, or like good practices in conflict. Like when we're used to be in a conflict, or we are less scared of conflict, and we kind of know what level it's like when we fight with someone, we kind of know how we will injure them permanently and what is okay. And navigating that kind of helps us, I think, addressing conflict in a more sustainable way. So there are different ways of managing conflict. One thing is conflict resolution, is like trying to resolve the conflict and put an end to it. One thing is conflict management, when we try to moderate and inhibit the conflict. And one is conflict transformation. It's like seeing conflict as a positive opportunity to imply change and improvement. Now, all these ways of handling conflict come with their own time frame and their own requirements in terms of energy that we put in it. And every moment is not the good moment to do each of them. Like if we have a LARP to attend in 1 week and this very big conflict emerges between two players, maybe we will not see it as an opportunity to grow and change, etc., because we will have to manage it in order to be able to have that LARP in 1 week. There's no time to address it and to see it as a whole process. But sometimes like we need to be more aware of what kind of time frame we are in, and also recognize the moments where conflict can be fruitful if we address them correctly, and not just try to solve them, but also see like what does the conflict show in our functioning, and how can it be an opportunity for everyone to grow. And I think, yeah, again, what I've seen in the LARP community that I attend most here in Belgium, Francophone, is that we tend to be afraid of conflict and try to avoid it or resolve it. And sometimes we lose the opportunity to make something more fruitful of it, and that gives much maturity to the group. So this is my favorite slide, I think, because it's again about the time frames of conflict, and what kind of reaction we can give. Most of the time when I hear about conflict in my LARP community, we talk about crisis. Crisis is something that emerges and like kind of explodes and touches everything and everyone, and it's not pretty. When there's a crisis, there's only one thing to do, is get out of there, kind of stop the crisis as soon as possible, because the number of how do you say that in video games, the amount of rate of like health points that you lose per second. In a crisis, the amount of life points you lose per second is too high. There's nothing to do, just get out there. We need to, oh yeah, thanks, damage per second. So we need to get out of there, because this is not sustainable for everyone. We need to stop it. This is not a great time to change for transformation and maturity. We just need to stop this. Intervention is a moment when things become apparent and we should address them. So the aim is to resolve or repair. So something has emerged in order to become apparent. It's not too late, but we should do something about it. The level of intervention that I think is mostly, like, it can be very invisible sometimes, and I think it really would gain from being made more explicit, is the level of maintenance. If the maintenance work is well done, most situations will not become apparent and will not require intervention. So maintenance in a group would be like, we have a meeting or we have an event, and some people send text messages to other people after the event, being like, "Hey, how are you? How did you come home? How do you feel about it after?" Or being at a meeting and seeing someone is not in their best mood or best shape, and seeing that person and being like, "Hey, maybe we should go and have a drink this week because I don't know, I see you're not in your shoes." So it's also like cooking for the group, like having nice moments when we have a meal, we share a meal, and we create nice moments together. When we have this maintenance done, the group will just be more healthy, and we will not have to take medication to correct things that did not work. Maintenance work, it makes more visible the fact that fragility is a state of being, that everything is fragile, and if we don't tend to it, it will degrade. And groups are like that. If we don't actively tend to them and nurture them in order to make them a healthy place for everyone, they will degrade. And I think most LARP groups, they degrade like that. They just they just kind of, I don't know, no one sees what happened, but for some reason it's not working like it was before. So maintenance is a skill. Spotting the fragility, assessing it, and handling it appropriately is a skill. Sometimes we go out with a bulldozer for a situation that would require more like delicate intervention. That can hurt the group a lot because we lack what we call in French tact. I think it's said in English too. So yes, maintenance, when it's done correctly, will like not hurt the group. It will, help it. And also, one last thing about maintenance is maintenance requires to pay attention to the attentions of others. Like most of the time, I don't know, sometimes what happens is that one person leaves the group, and for some reason, 6 months after, we have problems. And the question we should ask is, what was that person doing that no one is doing anymore? And sometimes people leave the group or they stop doing a certain type of work because they burned out on something and no one does the work anymore. I'm thinking of like one group that I experienced where there was a crisis at some point between two people, and it required a lot of work from certain people to stop the crisis, to tend to the people, to try and repair. And after this crisis, people were burned out in their caretaker role, and they stopped doing maintenance because they were tired of it. And the group started degrading from there because several people who used to be doing the maintenance work didn't. So paying attention to the amount of energy that we are able to give. Sometimes it's not enough. Sometimes some things are left untended for, but that's a key aspect of a healthy group. The group's cycle of life. Fixity is a pitfall. We tend to, when we love a group, we want to see it like fixed in time. We have this imagery of like, this is the moment when we were one, and this is important, and we loved it. And we refer to that moment as being the group. When it changes, we feel like it's not the same group as it used to be. We're kind of disappointed, etc. But fixity is a pitfall. No group can thrive sustainably with fixity. So every group needs to renew itself with new people, with new ideas, with new dynamics, with new projects. And that really confronts the group's identity, because most of the time we tend to see the group identity as either in relationship to their origin or to their goal. Groups that are defined by their origin would be like, this group is this set of 10 people, and now there are more 20 people around them, but it's not really the same group anymore. We used to be better. We used to be this group, and that is when the group was who it was. The goal would be, this group is, I don't know, we attend, like, we're playing these mercenaries in this specific LARP, and that is what we exist for. And maybe after several years, people will not be that excited to play mercenaries anymore, and that will create some kind of like weird, who are we? And then people will be fixed on that, and maybe we need to assess it and just set new goals. David Verkouteren, who is referring to Deleuze's, who's a French philosopher, concept of rhizome, says that we should think from the middle, like refer to the group identity as what is happening in the middle of it, and kind of deploy it from there. Because thinking the group from its origin or for its goals usually creates some kind of crystallization around fixity. So a lot of groups have a hard time integrating new people. I don't know if that's true for your LARP scene too, but when you're in a group, like you're like, oh, we're 10 and we're friends and I love everyone in the group, having new people can create new balance and bring the former group out of balance. So thinking about how we integrate new people is a hard aspect of it. And I have experienced group where integrating new people actually created a lot of hurt because it was not done right. One thing that we could ask ourselves is like, what kind of criteria are we using when we have new people coming? Sometimes we want people to join because we love them, because they're like dear friend, and I would love to LARP more with that person, so I'm inviting them into the group. But sometimes that doesn't really match with the project of the group. Like that person wants to play an elf and we're all playing orcs, and that doesn't go very well. Some people will adhere to the project very well, but they're not really friends. So we need to balance that out. There are different reasons to have new people or different criteria we can have. But I think it's mostly important to be lucid about how we are integrating people, what we are expecting from those people or from the group, and also what is the process. Sometimes that can create a lot of difficulties. Also, in terms of like legitimacy, making them feel legitimate to participate and contribute to the group. Sometimes people who arrive later will not have that, or will have a harder time to obtain it, and they will like it's hard. Like it's a thing to keep in mind. Like, how do we help new people to find a real place in the group in order to make the group thrive with new energy? And that asks for a lot of explicitation of how does the group function. I am going back to the stages of group development, because I said earlier, Bruce Tuckman, he identified 4 phases, and actually 10 years later with Marianne Jensen, he added a 5th phase that I think is interesting. The phase is adjourning. The adjourning is a phase that I think we oversee it a lot. I mean, we don't give the attention we should to that phase, because sometimes there are moments of closing in the group. So it can be when one person departs or several people departs, or sometimes we're just closing the group for real, like we're stopping it. And creating a ritual around these phases helps to have clarity again, but also it helps to avoid secondary drama. For example, I've heard about one group that they felt like they were no, what was happening in the group is that for some reason there was a lot of difficulty and drama coming up, and people were kind of frustrated about it. It was a lot to handle, etc. But when like one person came and saw this talk, they were like, I think we are at the end of our life together as a group, and we have a hard time addressing it because it's sad. We love each other. We have formed a beautiful community and we have beautiful memories together. We don't want it to end. So maybe degrading the group without knowing, not on purpose, but maybe the group having all these difficulties, etc., is actually a way for us to have an easier time to accept that the group is ended. Now, I'm not sure I clear explaining this? Is this making sense? Sometimes thinking about the ending provokes a lot of grief and we want to avoid it. But having clarity about the ending of a group, what are the conditions that a group is going to end, it helps us avoid drama and maybe finish on a more positive note than finishing in like flames and loss when we could just end up in the right way. But it's really hard to think about it that phase. Again, about the stages of group development, these are cycling and it's not maybe definitive, and maybe there are phases of adjourning on certain aspects of the group and not on certain others. But we still need to give place to the types of grief that we can have and experience about certain phases of it. I could not help myself but to put this image. So it's the scene of the Lord of the Rings where this is the last of the community. And the Gandalf says, like, here at last on the shores of the sea comes the end of our fellowship. I will not say to not weep, for all tears are not evil. And just experiencing the grief that sometimes comes from the end of a group is also a way of maybe experiencing the sadness of things ending should not replace the joy that it was to be part of it. And again, with the fixity of what we want, sometimes we are attached to a certain form of the group, a certain set of people, and maybe there was like people leaving, and we feel like this group is not existing anymore. But just accepting the changing is also accepting the grief that comes with it. And group experiences, even though they can be difficult and they can go with a lot of drama and they can come a lot of work and difficulties, are also happy experiences that give us a lot of joy and power and beautiful memories and relationships. So thank you for listening. I have put on this slide several topics that I have not addressed that could be like dug deeper. So it just, yeah, some things that we could talk, but I would love to hear your questions or remarks or experiences because we could have a lot of more discussions. So yes, please raise your hand if you want to talk so we can organize this or write it in the chat. So thank you. I will, yeah, most of my bibliography is in French. And I don't know, I will disappear. So you can read it. It's fine, it's fine. Okay. Are there questions or remarks or anything? So someone says, this was an excellent talk that shone the light on many difficult questions and explained them very succinctly and clearly. Thank you. I actually have like a lot of more material that I would like to put somewhere. And if there are topics that I have not addressed, and that is part of your group experience, I would love to hear what they are because I think there's a lot of more things that can be said. Yeah. But thank you for your comment. If there are no questions, that I can also just continue talking, really. But please tell me if you want me to stop or not. Yeah, people saying that they will definitely implement parts of this lecture to their group. Please do. Oh, the noisy excellent and the silent crack. It's I don't remember like everything I wanted to put in that chapter, but I think it refers a lot to maintenance. Some groups they end with a noisy accident, and we can identify what went wrong, and there is a before and an after, something that happened. And when we try to diagnose what happened in a group, well, we know where to start. Some groups they have a silent crack, like there's a before and an after, but we don't know exactly what happened, and that is really a problem of paying attention. Or maybe sometimes we can never know, I don't know. But yeah, so thinking in terms of noisy accident and silent crack sometimes gives us the vocabulary, the words to say what happened or what didn't, but to address it. Yeah, someone said they really liked mentioning of the group ending. We tend not to address or even recognize that our group might end and how we should react. Yes. Yes. What are your thoughts on conflicts between leaders in the groups? Yeah, that is a very good question. I think it depends on how leadership is distributed. Because that can be very different from one group to another. Some groups are very horizontal with like very shared leadership, and different situations can make new leaders emerge. So sometimes we're used to a certain type of people, like some people having the leadership or having the social power, the influence, the authority. And when two of these people are in conflict, it redistributes sometimes. Sometimes it just creates a schism, so it just creates a division in the group. I have experienced one group where two very strong personalities in the groups who were in a position of leadership, they never got along. And I think it created something very fruitful for the group because their shared influence kind of brought something very interesting and lifeful in the group with their energy. But if we did not have an attention to maintenance, that would create cracks. So I like to say, like, these two personalities, if we did not put oil on their mechanisms, they would at some point create conflict. But the rest of the group or people inside the group needed to pay attention to put oil on that in order to put the maintenance, in order for the situation not to escalate to the group dividing. I'm sure there's a lot of things we could say about it. This lecture shed light on some things we have experienced in our group. Thank you. It was beneficial and interesting. Thank you. Oh, I see someone raises their hand, so maybe you can ask your question.
Yeah, in the interest of in the topic of conflict, you talked about higher levels of conflict. What do you mean that conflict is more common in some groups but in lower magnitude, or that conflict is something more of another level of conflict in a higher level? Well, how did you mean that?
Sorry, can you? I was distracted also, so can you please repeat?
Oh, you mentioned about higher levels of conflict on some groups, right?
Yeah.
You meant that the conflict was more common, but in a lower magnitude,
Mm-hmm.
or you meant that the conflict was in some higher level, like I don't know. How did you mean that? You meant that it's better to have a higher conflict but in
Mm.
lower magnitude, right?
I'm not sure talking in terms of magnitude helps because some like for example this one like second example I was saying about this group that were friends for 25 years and often like it happened that they were screaming and crying and slamming doors and not talking to each other for several days and then kind of still continuing. I would say it's high magnitude in terms of conflict. I don't know. So I think magnitude is not a right way of seeing it because you can have like a high magnitude of conflict and still not make permanent damage.
Mm.
What I think I like want to say with like some kind of ethics of conflict is how to navigate conflict in order to not, I don't know, yeah, that's the question, right? How to be in a conflict and be able to kind of play to lift, in a conflict, or play to challenge. I don't know if these are the right terms, but be in a conflict and create conflict together, but not breaking the relationship and the game between us. I
Mm.
think maybe our experience of like in-game conflict can be very helpful. How good are we to have in-game conflict? And like I think that creates something where we should like we're able to be in a conflict and still not completely hate the other person because we recognize that we have roles and functions in this conflict and that it's not the whole of who we are and there's still some kind of connection there. And I think out of the game it's kind of the same. We can be in a conflict together and be really pissed off by one another and but still not lose that connection. And I think sometimes when we are in a conflict, we sever this connection,
Mm.
and that makes
Yeah.
it very hard to come back from. But we can have very high conflictuality and not cut this connection.
Mm.
Um, yeah. Um, how a question, how would we handle if someone from the group starts to organize gatherings and separates some people from the others as a form of isolating individuals? This looks like something like a very concrete situation. Um, how to handle that? I want to like just throw some of the like tools that were in the talk in it just to see how they can be useful. But um, I think the distribution of leadership can be an interesting way of seeing it. Um, or like no, just to come back. No, so um, in a certain school of sociology that is clinical sociology, um, they see conflict as a question of power. What power is used? Who has the legitimacy to use the power? And how are we creating power, um, like dynamics, or maybe claiming power or trying to reclaim power? Um, and I think in situations, in groups, like the distribution of power is a very complex matter. And it's not always easy to see who has what kind of power. But being clear with that helps to see who has what kind of legitimacy to address certain situations. Um, if we're trying to organize without certain people, what are the power dynamics between them? If it's a group of like people who have more legitimate power inside a group that try to organize without some people, do they feel threatened? Like how does the power distribute and change hands? If it's people who feel they have less power and they try to organize as of isolating, maybe they want to reclaim some kind of power. I don't know. Like this is one way would look I would look at it. Um, but there probably is like a lot of other ways to navigate that question. Yes, you raise your hand.
Yeah, since you study sociology and you might have more insight on that, uh, have any patterns been observed on structure of groups according to age, for example? I mean, uh, you have presented some groups from different ages at their core. For example, the
Mhm.
teenage LARPers and
Yeah,
the
yeah.
more mature ones. In the general population, or with greater amount of data you might have you observed any patterns on how groups work and form and govern themselves according to age?
Um, okay, I don't have patterns because this is a very small study. I just have interviewed like 11 or 12 groups. I just want to like say, um, I don't think the older LARPers are specifically more mature than the younger ones. I think their ways of organizing can be very different, and sometimes the younger ones have, um, yeah, like a lot of maturity, maybe sometimes looking at these questions of power and maintenance and like different cultural tools to build groups. Um, yeah, I don't think I see patterns. I see examples that illustrate them, and the examples that I gave have that purpose of just showing diversity. But I'm not sure we could put them into categories. Or maybe we could, like saying groups that are created by two or three people, like charismatic leaders, and have people around them could be a category. But even that, it's I think they can be very different situations. Um, if we go back to the examples, like the enlightened dictatorship, that is very explicit. We're three people and we take all the decisions. And if you're not happy, well, you can organize on your own. It's very explicit. It's very accepted by the rest of the group. If you compare it to the group where it was founded by several people and the rest of the group did not accept their kind of leadership and kind of did rebel against it at some point. So it's just, I think groups are messy. And most of the times it's more interesting to see, um, yeah, how they evolve, um, than trying to make big categories. So yeah, I don't know. Question. What could help manage a power vacuum in a group? Oh, a power vacuum. I would love to hear more about what that is if you want um to unmute your mic and explain that. Um if that's
Oh,
possible.
yeah, that's possible. Yeah, in a certain like group where there's one like leader where he takes most, if not all, of the decisions. He decides where the group will go, where the group will not go, in most cases. Um, and that like person disappears for like
Mhm.
however much time, and you have this like lack of uh
Yeah.
my English don't work, sorry, doesn't work.
Legitimacy, authority to use power. Yeah.
There's this lack of people won't take choices. I'll just describe it. I cannot
Mhm.
think of the word.
Yeah.
Because they're used to that one leader taking all the choices and just following orders.
Hmm.
So there's like this certain vacuum in a group where people won't take choices because they're not used to that and they're
Hmm.
not trained for it, either in experience or in like actual training. And there's this like emptiness of initiative. I
Yeah. Yeah.
remember. And there's this like lack of initiative in a group.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you for clarifying that. Um, yeah, I think if I go, oh, I cannot change my slides anymore. That's ah. Okay. If I go back to the types of power, um, which is at the beginning of the presentation. So there's this, oh no, sorry. So to come back to just the image of the fire with the power and the authority, which is the power is the fire, and the authority is the permission to use the power. And that comes with responsibility that people might or might not want to avoid, maybe. I would phrase that in these terms. When there's one person that has been doing, like, kind of has had all of the authority or most of the authority and has taken decisions alone or these kind of things, it usually creates a system where other people disengage and let things happen. And now there's a lot of ways to navigate it. Like some leaders would complain about it, like, oh, people are just tourists. Or some leaders would complain about it, but actually reinforce the situation by continuing to have all the power because that's how they organize. And if you don't give the tools to people to participate, they will not. So sometimes when there is a like one leader that has been very central and he leaves or they leave, people don't have the tools. Or we need to create a whole new system of authority in order to feel like to give ourselves legitimacy to use the power to influence the group, maybe make it something else than what it is. And that's a very difficult thing to do. And again, like you said, sometimes people are not used to it or they don't have the skills. I think that's a very interesting remark, because in my experience, LARP groups have been a place where people have learned these tools specifically. I think from people who have LARPed from a very young age, organizing around LARP has been the place where we learned a lot of the tools that, like, yeah, organizing, feeling legitimate to do things, to contribute. But yeah, another way of seeing it is that sometimes people don't do or will not contribute or participate more. I have one example of, again, a group where it was interesting because I think it was a group that was formed by a lot of people who did have the ability to be leaders. So I think the statistics, the percentage of people who were leadership material was very high. And for some time, different people took turns into leadership and they contributed a huge amount. And then they were tired and they withdrew. And when they withdrew, some other leader kind of was like, oh, I'm going to do it now. And they burned out. And then at some point, we were all very perplexed, like very confused about how our group was a lot of leadership material, but no one was taking the leadership anymore. And I think that was because the way the group was organized, it burned out their leaders for some reason. So yeah, the vacuum in power, I think it's a real problem. And it also goes back to that slide about structure and inherent movement of the group. Sometimes, like the movement of the group is also what makes the group thrive and grow and produce new things. Sometimes the life is just dead for some reason. Maybe it was used to, like, if it's a plant, maybe it was used to grow around a tutor, like with the structure, and the structure left, and then the plant becomes very sloppy. And it needs to create new roots. It needs to create new ways of structuring itself. Oftentimes, and I'm referring to the rules part of this talk, oftentimes when someone leaves, it's hard to find someone that will fit their shoes. Like if we distribute the roles exactly in the same way, we will not find someone who will exercise leadership in the same way. And then that means that the whole group needs to rearrange. So maybe in our image of fixity of the group, like this is our group, we organize like this, and then the leader leaves, we don't reorganize. And we don't give ourselves the permission to do something else. There's a raised hand, so I'm going to let you talk.
Yeah, on that topic of power vacuum, because we had a discussion in our group on how to handle it. I think there is an organization in human history that really doesn't like power vacuums, and if there is a power vacuum, it cannot function, and if it cannot function, it's very bad, and that's the army. So in the army, there is never a power vacuum.
Mhm.
And what I want to say with this example, um, I think in the group, despite on how they're organized hierarchically, if there is an enlightened dictator on the top, or a council, or whatever, or they are horizontally organized, it doesn't matter. I think there should be always a culture of cultivating some kind of leadership on the lower echelons of the hierarchy. For example, even the leader should allow the lower ranks to have some agency and learn how to lead a smaller group. And then these leaders should allow their subordinates, let's say, to learn how to govern a smaller group, etc., down to the last man. So that's the only way I can see that there cannot be a power vacuum. If the leader leaves, there should be another one who can take their shoes, not in the same efficiency maybe, but he will have the tools to at least get the group going. If that leader leaves or is gone, there's another one who can lead the group in a similar fashion. So how we do it in our group is that we cultivate this culture of micro leadership down to the last to our last member. So doesn't matter if our leader or our second command is there or is not there. The group can function in a very satisfactory manner.
Yeah, I also want to like I feel like here in these examples we are using leadership again in a very power over structure. Like who has the pyramidal position of deciding who
Yeah, or who can exercise authority, or who can exercise
who
authority over
can,
others. Yeah.
and I want to like just put some examples in there where like some people who do a lot of the work that actually is leadership work might be not that visible. And some people are more comfortable doing it from not a position of being visible as a authority in a group. So it's very interesting sometimes when we look at groups to see that some people do the work, but will not do it if we give it to them. Or I don't know if that's the right way of phrasing it, but yeah, like for example, I have one group in mind where like in the imagery or the representation of the group, when we would talk to just normal LARPers, like, oh, this group, who is it? And they would be like, oh, this is the group of X. Like this person represent that group, is the visible person that is the leader of their group. And when I looked like kind of deeper into the group functioning, that person that was very visible was indeed the person that was visible, but actually there was someone else doing almost all of the tasks. Like the tasks that were required for the group to function. It was one other person that did not have the spotlight. And I think if that person left, the group would be kind of out of balance or in need to rearrange, but it would not be that visible. And I think it would have taken time for the group to realize that like a lot of the engines that were conducting the fire of the group were just left. So what I hear when I hear power vacuum is, what if the people don't feel legitimacy or like authority to use the power, and then the group just kind of stands still and dies out. And that's a difficult thing to navigate.
Yeah, about authority. I think that's what Yasonas was referring to, about the lack of authority. But you have expanded on a very a way much more complex topic on losing a very integral part of the group. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, that's way more harder to replace
Yeah.
than an authority figure. Authority figures can be replaced kind of easily if you cultivate the culture of micro leadership, but
Mhm.
skills are not so easily replaced. Yeah.
Yeah, one way of giving skills to people is to have buddies. Like there's
Hmm.
this person who does this task, like treasury, or I don't know, like specific tasks that requires a skill set for the group, and
Mentor and
maybe
disciple. Yeah,
yeah,
like something like
maybe
that. Yeah.
someone who wants to learn about that can just do it with that person for a year. And then that would maybe help them to feel legitimate to do it after, because sometimes like I've heard from an interview someone that says that they were in a group where they really wanted to let the place to everyone to contribute and to take responsibilities. But then what happened is that some people took responsibilities for things that they did not have the
The skill
shoulders or
set.
the skill set
Yeah.
for some reason to do it. And then, I don't know, like 3 weeks before the LARP, they realized that like it was not done, and it was kind of a crisis of we need to do it now, but we don't have time. And they were really frustrated by the situation. Also because they didn't want to judge people beforehand, like saying you don't have the skill set to do this. But at the same time, they did say that it did create a lot of frustration, and people who did put a lot of energy in the group left after that because they were like frustrated. Um, I had something else I wanted to say, but it just oh yes, one thing that's also an interesting example. And I think after that, we will slowly be closing to stay into the time frame that we gave ourselves. Um, One thing that I've experienced, I've seen, is that in one group, so the group I was talking about, where there was a lot of different leadership, like different leader material, and they were all burned out for some reason. So it was a difficult phase for the group, and we were kind of thinking of closing the group because of that. There was also a lot of conflict between leaders, which comes back to a question that someone asked before. And so that created paralysis in the group because different leaders were in conflict, so they kind of canceled each other out, and then the whole group was kind of stuck in that. Um, and it took someone who was maybe in not so much of a position of explicit power before to kind of assess the situation and see, okay, these are the leaders, or and we can do that exercise in our own, at home. Just list the people in the group, and then try to see like what are the influences, what kind of authority do they have, what kind of power do they wield, with the categories of power that like Starhawk gives, and kind of trying to arrange the people and see what are the centers of power and what are the people who could maybe replace the people who might step out if they're cancelled by a conflict or something. So it needed this exercise to see who are the people who are still in a position to do something that are not cancelled by conflict, and who are there and what kind of connections do we have to build between them. Like maybe one of these persons do not have the authority to step into the situation to bring the group to some new phase. But maybe if these three people talk to each other, they have the common shared authority to to make a proposition. So that's one way of navigating it, is creating alliances, like alliances. And but what that also took is for one person who was not identified in a position of I have authority in the group to step in and realize that they were in a position, like they were next in line. They were in a position that maybe if they chose to, they could. And that is something we need to give ourselves. Or maybe one person in the group, in creating like smaller moments when we are with just one or two people, we can say that to one another, saying like, if you gave a proposition now, I would follow you. Or what do you think we should do in the group? And we can kind of lift each other into feeling legitimacy. So thank you for your questions and remarks and nice comments. Thank you. Thank you for listening too. If you want to share the talk to people from your group or just in general, Ivana and I will try to make sure that this recording is accessible somewhere. And I wish you all a very good LARP season. So thank you. I will try to disappear now.
Thank you. Bye, Rachel.
Bye.
She's gone.